Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be taking a look at the history of Tanzania.
Okay.
We'll be exploring its ancient origins, the rise of powerful city-states along the coast, and even getting into some pretty surprising technological advancements that happened way back when.
Okay.
Our main source material for this deep dive is historytanzania.pdf. So let's dive in and see what fascinating nuggets we can unearth.
Sounds good.
So, what jumps out at you right away? What's the most interesting or surprising thing you've come across so far?
Well, I think what's immediately intriguing is that Tanzania is considered one of the oldest continuously inhabited places on Earth.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, so it's incredible to think that people have lived in this region, witnessed the unfolding of history for such a long period of time.
It really sets the stage for a grand story, huh?
It does, it does.
And speaking of ancient history, our source mentions the Olduvai Gorge. What makes this place so special? Why is it so important in the context of Tanzania's history?
The Olduvai Gorge is like a treasure trove of fossils and artifacts.
Oh, okay.
It gives us a glimpse into, well, the lives of our earliest ancestors.
I see.
The discoveries made there have really completely changed our understanding of human evolution.
Wow, that's amazing. It's like stepping back in time millions of years.
It really is.
As we move forward through time, the document highlights the Hadza and Sanda people.
Yeah.
Who are they and what makes them so unique?
So they are believed to be among the most ancient indigenous groups in Eastern Africa.
I see.
What's fascinating about them is their languages, which are unlike any other African language family. So this suggests that they've, maintained a distinct cultural and linguistic identity for an incredibly long time.
It's a testament to their resilience.
It is.
And the enduring power of cultural heritage. But they weren't the only people who called Tanzania home, right?
No, not at all.
The source mentions several migrations that brought new groups and influences to the region. Can you tell us a bit about these migrations? Like, who came to Tanzania and when did these movements happen?
Yeah, so there were waves of migration over thousands of years.
Okay.
First, we see the arrival of Southern Cushitic speakers from the north, ancestors of groups like the Iraq and Brunei.
I see.
Later, Eastern Cushitic people, also from the north, settled in the area.
Got it.
And then from the south came the Southern Nilotes, including the Datug.
Wow, it's fascinating to see how these movements of people contributed to the cultural tapestry of Tanzania.
Yeah?
And then we have the arrival of the Mashariki Bantu.
Right.
Can you tell us more about their impact? Who were they and what did they bring to the region?
The Mashariki Bantu migration was a pivotal moment, and they came from West Africa originally.
Okay.
They settled around Lake Victoria and Lake Tanganyika, and they brought with them the knowledge of agriculture, particularly the cultivation of yams. So that would have transformed the way people lived in the region?
So they weren't just migrating, they were bringing with them the seeds of cultural and societal change in a way.
Exactly.
And their influence didn't stop there, did it?
No, not at all.
How did their presence continue to shape Tanzania over time?
Well, over centuries, they spread eastward across Tanzania.
I see.
And, their agricultural practices, their language, and their social structures, they all influence the development of communities throughout the region.
It's like a ripple effect. Their arrival, setting in motion a cascade of changes across Tanzania. And of course, we can't forget about the Maasai.
Right.
With their, iconic presence in East African culture. What can you tell us about them? When did they arrive and what impact did they have?
So the Maasai, they arrived more recently from, present-day South Sudan.
Okay.
And they added another layer to Tanzania's cultural mosaic.
Yeah.
Their pastoralist traditions and distinctive way of life have become really deeply ingrained in the identity of East Africa.
It paints a picture of Tanzania as a place where cultures have met, mingled, and evolved over millennia.
It really does.
But what really caught my eye in the source material is Tanzania's early mastery of iron and steel.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't have expected that so far back in history.
It is surprising. It's a fascinating aspect of Tanzania's past that I think often gets overlooked.
Yeah, for sure.
But the Para people, located in northeastern Tanzania, they were known for their exceptional skill in iron production.
Wow.
And their expertise would have been invaluable at a time when tools and weapons were essential for survival and progress.
It's amazing to think about these early blacksmiths shaping metal and, in a way, shaping their world. But the source mentions another group, the Haya people, who took ironworking to a whole new level, didn't they?
They did, yeah. The Haya people who lived on the western shores of Lake Victoria were true innovators.
Okay.
They developed a type of high-heat blast furnace that allowed them to forge carbon steel at incredibly high temperatures,
How high are we talking?
over 1,820 degrees Celsius.
Wow, that's incredible. Even by today's standards, that's pretty impressive. How did they manage to achieve such high temperatures so long ago?
It's remarkable. They developed this technology over 1,500 years ago.
Wow.
It speaks volumes about their ingenuity and understanding of metallurgy. And, well, this mastery of steel would have had profound consequences, giving them an edge in everything from agriculture and warfare to trade and construction.
Right.
It makes you wonder how this one innovation might have shaped their social structures, influenced their relationships with neighboring groups, and ultimately determined their fate.
It's a reminder that technological advancements, even those from centuries ago, can have a ripple effect across time. But the story of Tanzania doesn't end there, does it?
No, it doesn't.
The source hints at the emergence of powerful city-states along the coast connected to a global network of trade. This sounds like a whole other chapter in Tanzania's history.
It is. And this is where the story takes a fascinating turn, moving from the interior to the coast, from the mastery of metal to the mastery of trade routes and maritime connections.
Okay, I'm ready to hear more. Let's dive into the world of the Swahili city-states and explore how Tanzania became a key player in the ancient world of global commerce. Okay, so now we're shifting gears a bit, right?
Yeah.
Moving from the inland regions to the coast of Tanzania, our source, historytanzania.pdf, talks about some fascinating stuff going on over there, connecting Tanzania to this big global trade network, going as far back as the first millennium AD.
Right.
I mean, wow, that's so long ago.
It really is. It makes you realize that, well, what we think of as globalization, really started much earlier than we often think.
Yeah.
Like, think about it. Merchants from the Persian Gulf and India were already interacting with communities along the coast of East Africa.
Wow, that's hard to even imagine.
Right.
At a time when, the Roman Empire was still a major power. That just blows my mind.
Yeah, it's incredible.
So what kind of impact did these early interactions have on the East African coast?
Oh, they had a huge impact. I mean, think about this. One of the most significant influences was the introduction of Islam to the Swahili coast.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and this was probably as early as the 8th or 9th century AD.
Wow.
So centuries before Islam became a big force in other parts of Africa. Yeah. It really shows you how early those connections were between East Africa and the wider Islamic world.
It seems like trade played a major role in shaping, the whole development of the Swahili city-states. But I'm curious, how did these coastal communities even get started? Where did it all begin?
Well, before there were these big city-states, you had Bantu-speaking communities along the coast of Tanzania.
Gotcha.
And during the first millennium, they started establishing farming and trading villages.
Okay.
And these villages were the foundation for the Swahili city-states that would eventually, really flourish.
So these early villages, they were kind of like the building blocks of something much larger and more complex, right?
Exactly.
Can you give us an example of one of these early settlements?
Yeah, our source mentions Fukuchani. It's on the island of Zanzibar. And excavations there showed evidence of a community that existed, at least as far back as the 6th century CE.
So what was Fukuchani like? Was it just a simple village, or was there something more to it?
It was definitely more than just a simple village. They were engaged in agriculture, fishing, and all sorts of crafts.
How do we know that? What kind of evidence did archaeologists find?
Oh, they found remnants of timber buildings. So that suggests they had more permanent structures. They also found shell beads.
Okay.
Probably worn as adornments, right?
Right.
And they found the tools used to create these beads, which suggests a level of artistry and craft specialization.
That makes sense.
But the most interesting find, I think, was imported pottery from the Gulf region.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, and this pottery dates back to the 5th to 8th centuries.
So even back then, they were part of these long-distance trade networks. That's amazing.
It is.
So was Fukuchani unique, or were there other settlements like it along the coast?
Oh, no, there were definitely other settlements. Similar sites have been discovered at Mkokotoni and even Dar es Salaam.
Wow.
Which suggests a whole network of interconnected Swahili communities stretching along the coast.
So they weren't just isolated villages scattered along the coastline?
No, not at all. They were connected.
So how did these, what seemed like, simple farming and fishing villages, how did they evolve into these grand city-states? What happened?
Well, trade in the Indian Ocean kept growing.
Okay.
By the 10th century, Zanzibar had become a major trading hub, linking East Africa to a huge network that spanned from the Middle East all the way to Asia. And this surge in trade was the economic engine that really fueled the rise of the Swahili city-states.
Makes sense. So what caused this explosion in Indian Ocean trade?
There are a couple of key factors, according to our source.
Okay, what were they?
First, you had a big increase in shipping activity from places like Egypt and Persia.
Got it.
Connecting the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf to the Indian Ocean. And this made those trade routes more accessible and profitable, opening up, new possibilities for merchants and traders.
So improved shipping technology and infrastructure, huh? It seems like there's always a link between, technological advancements and major historical shifts.
There is.
You said there was another factor.
Yeah, the relocation of the Fatimid Caliphate, which was a powerful Islamic dynasty.
I see.
And they moved their capital to Fustat, which is present-day Cairo.
Okay.
And this happened in the 10th century. And this further fueled trade and cultural exchange between East Africa and the Middle East.
It's amazing how things that seem unrelated, like a dynasty moving its capital, can have such a big impact on places far away.
It really is.
It seems like a perfect storm was brewing, right? Expanding trade routes, new technologies, political changes, all coming together at the same time.
It was. And that created the perfect conditions for the Swahili city-states to emerge. They were perfectly positioned along the coast, and they seized these opportunities, taking advantage of their location and connections.
And they grew.
Oh, they grew rapidly. They went from small villages to bustling urban centers.
Wow.
And they were all competing with each other for control of trade routes and resources.
So it wasn't all peaceful and harmonious, huh?
Not exactly.
So let's talk about Kilwa. Our source names them as a prominent medieval city-state in Tanzania. What set them apart? What made them so powerful?
Well, Kilwa's location was a big advantage.
Okay.
It's on an island off the coast of Tanzania.
Gotcha.
And it was situated right at the southern end of the Indian Ocean monsoon winds. So that gave them a prime position for controlling trade routes.
I see.
And their influence extended far beyond their island. They had a network of smaller ports that stretched all the way down to what is now Mozambique.
So Kilwa sounds like a real powerhouse. They were really in charge. What were they trading?
Our source mentions Sofala, which was a port city in what's now Mozambique.
Okay.
And Sofala was a gold emporium. So it connected Kilwa to the vast gold reserves of the interior.
Wow, so Kilwa was basically at the heart of a gold rush. No wonder they were so wealthy and influential.
Right.
But gold wasn't the only thing they traded, right?
No, of course not. They also traded ivory, spices, timber, all sorts of valuable commodities.
It seems like they had a really diverse trade network.
They did.
Yeah.
And that fueled their economic dominance and made them one of the most influential city-states in East Africa.
Yeah.
But, their success also attracted rivals. They weren't the only ones who wanted to control this lucrative trade network.
So they had enemies.
They did. The document mentions Mombasa and Malindi, which are in present-day Kenya, as major rivals.
Okay.
They were also located strategically along the trade routes, and they challenged Kilwa's dominance.
That makes sense.
So it was a constant struggle for control and influence.
It sounds like a high-stakes game of power and economics, with these city-states all trying to get ahead. So how long did Kilwa manage to hold on to their top spot?
For centuries, actually, which shows how strategic their location was and how good they were at politics and trade. But their dominance wouldn't last forever. Toward the end of the 15th century, a new force arrived. The Portuguese.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and their arrival marked a major turning point in the history of East Africa. It was the beginning of a new era of exploration, conquest, and colonialism.
The Portuguese. That's a huge moment in the history of Tanzania, and I want to hear more about what happened when they showed up. But before we get into that, let's just take a second to, think about what we've learned so far.
Wow, we've covered so much in this deep dive. It's amazing.
We have.
It really is. From those ancient origins and the iron and steel stuff to, those bustling city-states and the whole network of global trade they were part of.
Yeah.
It's just incredible how much history there is in Tanzania. It really challenges, I think, that idea that some parts of the world were somehow behind others,
I see what you mean.
Tanzania's history shows us that the world has been interconnected for centuries, with all these ideas and technologies and goods flowing between continents.
It definitely gives you a new perspective on Tanzania's place in the world.
It does.
You're right. But like any good story, there's always more to tell. Our source mentioned the Portuguese and, how they kind of changed things in the region, what happened.
Well, things get a bit more complex here. The Portuguese, you see, they were driven by this desire for wealth and power.
Right. Makes sense.
And they wanted to control those super valuable trade routes in the Indian Ocean.
I see.
So their arrival in East Africa, it really marked a big turning point.
So some powers declined and others, well, rose in their place.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how the arrival of, well, like a new force like that can just completely change things.
It can?
Did the Portuguese conquer Kilwa? Like, what happened to them?
Kilwa, even though they had all that wealth and those fortifications,
You're right.
they couldn't withstand the Portuguese. Kilwa was conquered in 1505. That was the beginning of Portuguese dominance in the region. But, well, the Portuguese weren't the only ones interested in East Africa.
Oh, really? Who else?
The Omani Arabs, who were based in Zanzibar, they challenged the Portuguese, and eventually they actually drove them out
When was that?
in the late 17th century.
Wow, so another power shift, with the Omani Arabs taking over. What happened to Tanzania under their rule?
Well, the Omani Arabs, they became big players in the East African slave trade.
Oh, no.
Yeah, this was a dark period, with a lot of exploitation. Slaves were taken from the interior and sold all over in places like Arabia and even the Americas.
It's hard to believe something so terrible could go on for so long.
It is. But thankfully, the slave trade was finally abolished in the 19th century.
What happened? Why did it end?
Well, there were abolitionist movements and, things were changing economically, so it wasn't as profitable anymore.
So it was a combination of factors, huh?
It was. But the effects of slavery are still felt in Tanzania today.
That's true. History isn't just about what happened in the past, but how those events shaped the present, right?
You're exactly right.
So what about after the slave trade ended? Was there peace in Tanzania then?
Not really. You see, as the slave trade declined, colonialism emerged.
Oh no, so another form of exploitation.
Unfortunately, yes. Germany took control of mainland Tanzania at the end of the 19th century and made it part of their colony, Germany's Africa.
Wow, so it seems like Tanzania just couldn't catch a break.
No, they really couldn't. And this period, well, it was more exploitation, of resources, and they forced European systems on Tanzania.
So it's Portuguese conquest, then the Omani Arabs, and then German colonization. It seems like Tanzania's history is just full of challenges and struggles.
It is.
Did they ever gain their independence?
They did after World War I. Germany's Africa was divided up between Britain and Belgium.
Okay.
And mainland Tanzania became a British territory, Tanganyika.
So even after the Germans were gone, they still weren't independent.
No. But during this period, you saw the rise of nationalist movements.
Right.
And they were demanding independence. And finally, in 1961, Tanganyika became free.
What an amazing moment.
It is. After centuries of being controlled by others, the people of Tanzania never gave up fighting for their freedom.
Exactly. So what happened after independence?
Tanzania had a lot of problems after independence.
Like what?
Poverty, not enough infrastructure, and political instability.
I see.
But Julius Nyerere, the first president, he started a socialist economic model called Ujamaa.
Oh.
And the goal was to create a more equal society.
Did it work?
It had its successes and failures, but it really impacted Tanzania's development.
Wow, what a journey we've been on.
It have been.
From ancient origins to the challenges of independence, it's just amazing.
It really shows how complex human history is.
Doesn't it? And how culture and technology are all intertwined, and also, well, the power of the human spirit to overcome adversity. You've given us so much to think about when it comes to Tanzania's past.
I'm glad.
I still have a lot of questions, but that's what's so great about history, right? It makes you want to keep learning.
It does.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Tanzanian history. We hope you enjoyed it.